Welcome to Monsters After Midnight. Tonight, we are exploring the aliens that walk among us through three different tales, some of my favorites. The first, a strange encounter at a diner late at night. The second, when an alien walked in, or a couple of aliens, a gang of aliens, walked into the Roswell Museum in 2009. And the third, real life encounters with the Men in Black. And I'm not talking like the fun Men in Black, Tommy Lee Jones and Will Smith, more of the uncanny valley, interdimensional creature Men in Black that shows up when you've had any sort of paranormal encounter. We're going to look at the connections with those guys and John A. Keel. But now it's time to get to the wasteland and get to the best part of it all, the reading. Let's get into a strange encounter late at night at a diner. The best place to have a strange encounter. This is one of my favorite stories. Again, proof of lights in the sky, creatures running by, proof of these interdimensional beings are able to appear to us, like, and maybe only us, and appear invisible to others. It lines up a lot of dots. It connects a lot of boop, 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 boop. Exactly. Dinner and a bit of a weird show. And like in the, if you were with me this morning on the Saturday morning book club, it lines up with a lot of what the encounter Jacques Vallée was talking about, where these entities say strange things to people. Like we read about this morning, one of my favorite new encounters that I know about now, where this alien got off his ship, this traveler got off his ship, interdimensional traveler, alien, whatever, got off his ship and asked the guy in France, it's like, what time is it? And the French guy looked at his watch and he's like, well, it's 2:30 p.m. And then the alien was like, no, it's not. It's 4 p.m. And then got back on his ship and left. So the encounters tonight, the same thing, like these strange kind of like cryptic messages that these entities are leaving. Jacques Vallée would argue that it's in order to shake us out of ourselves and help us like escape our closed-mindedness when it comes to these sorts of things, and help us like help our consciousness reach the next level, kind of like the esoteric or in like Eastern teachings of like contemplating a question like, what is the sound of one hand clapping? There's no answer to that, and that is the answer, you know, and like accepting that sort of thing. But anywho, this story kind of tracks with that, so I'm excited to share it with you all. Let's get into it. This is a story of a couple going by the pseudonym Frank and Kathy, because as we all well know, most people who have strange experiences and come forward and use their real name get bothered by folks. So they wanted to use a pseudonym, Frank and Kathy. This happened Saturday night, early in April 1974, in rural Hancock County, Ohio. Driving along a country road early in the evening, the couple observed a light low on the northern horizon. At first, they thought it was from a fire, and they decided to drive towards it to see if they could help. Then the fire shot up into the air and grew in size. That ain't no barn fire, Frank, stating the obvious, remarked to Kathy. He later told Hunker, and Hunker was the investigator looking into this, that it looked like the whole northeast section of the sky was on fire from it. It was pulsating and shooting off light. It was down on ground level, treetop height and below, just nosing around along the ground there. It appeared to be about 5 miles from them. This is a direct quote from Frank. I got on channel 18 of my CB radio and broke 4 other guys. And the CB radio is like that little like breaker 19. I got one behind me. It's just not hooked up to anything. So he got on his radio and he broke 4 others. He got in contact with 4 other guys in like a group chat on the radio. And Frank said, and I told him, fellas, this here's Long Rifle Man out here on Cromer Road, and I got a saucer critter. It's reddish orange and maybe 200 or 300 yards across, and it's moving around. And he went on. While we were talking on the radio, that thing seemed to open up and eject at the end of a rope something, a large square box kite contraption. it stuck them out, and they'd go whirly, whirly, whirly in the air for a while, and then it'd stick them back in and close the door. It appeared to me that it was taking samples of some kind. It turned towards us and approached. That's when I first said, Kathy, let's get out of here. We don't want to get scooped up by that contraption. But when it started chasing us, it quit pulling them out. When it turned slaunchways, that's edgeways or sideways, it would look like a long cigar. But when it would straighten out, it would look like a saucer. And when it come towards us, it came well within half a mile. I could hear some kind of running around sound very faintly to it. Anyway, we turned around and hauled tail out of there. It must have got aggravated at me telling the world where it was and what it was doing, because it commenced to following us. It followed us for 47 miles, according to my speedometer. We finally caused it to leave when we turned out the lights. Seems like it was following us by watching the headlights. So I turned out the lights. And with a black car and a black of night, I guess it finally gave up and left. Like in Batman Begins when he goes stealth mode. Frank and Kathy turned their attention to more earthly concerns, namely their hunger, and they decided to drive to a nearby roadside bar and restaurant, the Wigwam. It was now 2:15 a.m. Oh, the Wigwam sounds like a treat, don't it? No sooner had they stepped inside than a short, bald, fat man approached them with a question in a slow, choppy voice that sounded like nothing so much as a record being played at too slow a speed. What did you see in the sky? He ignored Frank's question about how he could possibly have known about their sighting. When he continued to press the couple for details, Frank snapped. I don't think that's any of your business. Still, he couldn't resist asking one more time about the source of the stranger's information concerning them. It isn't your business, but you tell me your business right now. At this final question, the man, Frank recalled, got the strangest look on his face. And then he said the weirdest thing I ever heard. The man opened his unusually large mouth, 5 inches at least, and declared, I live by visions. As if this were not unsettling enough, he bugged out his eyes out of his head a good 3 inches. Sometimes further, Kathy added. The strange talk reminds me of Indrid Cold, and Indrid Cold being like, I'm from a more advanced planet. I'll be back. Or also reminds me of the visitors from the early 19th century in 1897 who landed in America, and they were like, we're from Kansas. That's been my favorite story to think about. There are 2 cowboys, I believe it was out in Oklahoma, out in the plains, and they were roaming along, and they see this craft landed, and it's like a steampunk craft with all these like beeps and bobs coming out of it, because it was the 19th century, so the fashion of the time of strange craft were like crafty craft, like steampunk, lots of gears. These were looked like they were working craft. Lots of beep bloop bloop bloop. Anywho, these cowboys see one of these craft landed. Imagine it's like Howl's Moving Castle. That's what the craft in the 1800s that were seen around the world, the late 1800s, looked like Howl's Moving Castle type crafts. But anywho, these cowboys, they see one landed, and they see these people outside of it. These bearded men, and they come up to the bearded guys, and they're like, "Hey," and the bearded guy's like, "Oh, hi, we're just grabbing some water and refueling. How are you guys doing?" They're like, "Oh, good. Where are you guys from?" The aliens, the entities are like, "We're from Kansas." Like, "Oh, cool." And then the bearded man from the craft asked the cowboys, "Do you guys need a ride anywhere? Well, we can hook you up, man. Just get in the craft. We'll be there in no time." And they're like, "No, we're good." And they took off. Another one of my favorite encounter stories. Talking about the features of the man, the most unusual feature were the extraordinary long fingers. In estimation, they were twice the length of normal fingers. Not unnaturally, it occurred to Kathy that I was seeing things, but I knew we weren't seeing things. Yet whatever they were seeing, it didn't look as if anyone else was. To the couple's bafflement, nobody else in the crowded restaurant seemed to be paying any attention. In any event, Frank was growing ever angrier. I looked daggers at him, he recalled. He was starting to make me disgusted. Saucer critter notwithstanding. Oh, easy, Frank. He goes making eyes at my lady? Well, he turned away and went to the other end of the bar. All right, I can understand, Frank. Shortly thereafter, as Frank and Kathy got up to leave, the stranger demanded to know, where do you think you're going? You get back here. I want to talk to you. Frank turned to Kathy and said, we don't want to talk to that poor trash. Let's go. Well, I mean, lady, I don't know if the dude was flying around in a flying saucer. I don't know if he's poor. Everything was all right for a couple miles, as Frank remembered, and then there were two bright eyes that appeared like headlights, only they were real close set together, closer set than a Jeep would be. They approached and appeared to vary from 3 inches in diameter and very intense to about 12 inches, and they'd go back and up and raise up and down. The lights, which Frank first feared were from a vehicle at the mercy of a drunk driver, were 3 miles away and closing in fast. I was rolling along at 50, he said, and he was closing in at like 90. So we turned. I didn't want no part of him. Thinking of what he had done earlier, Frank turned off his lights. All of a sudden, zoop, 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 he said. Right down he went. He overrun the road, stopped in his tracks, backed up, turned down the road, and then took off. I presumed that he left. I turned on the lights again, and about 2 miles later, blink, there he was, right behind us again. This time the lights were 5 to 6 feet in the air. In other words, this was no car, at least of terrestrial manufacture. We lost him again by turning out the lights again, Frank said. I must admit, becoming a little unnerved. Just about then, Kathy related, it felt like a force came up behind me, behind my head, and made me turn around and look back. We were sitting there where the road ended and the other road comes through. And when I turned around, I seen this big orange ball coming up behind the car, and it acted like it was going to suck us up. I went to say, Frank, the orange ball, but all I could say was a bunch of mumbles. The car seemed to be in the grip of a force. The lights they had first seen then reappeared on the other side of the orange ball. Meanwhile, in front of them, according to Frank, was a little man in a dark object. He kept going back and forth and back and forth. It was just like a little man, like a devil or something. It looked like it had an odd-sized top on it, and it was all funny shaped. I could distinctly remember the triangle on the end of its tail. Is this the true form of the man they met in the diner? I was sitting still trying to make up my mind whether to cross 12 and go south or to go in on 12. But I had made up my mind that we better go straight across. And then when all this transpired, an instinct took over. And I pulled him into low gear, and away we went across. I let in the clutch and did give it gas, and nothing happened. Come on, let's go. We ain't gonna wait around for this thing. And I realized that the rear tires had broken traction. They're like... I stopped, put it in reverse, and backed up, and I definitely felt it wham, something solid. I yanked it into low and floored it and broke loose 3 times and then pulled itself across Route 12, and then the critter started following us again. We saw 2 white lights, and they were just like glued to the window, according to Kathy. We kept seeing this thing, the little man, going back and forth, back and forth. The object remained until the couple got within 1/4 of a mile of Frank's house in Findlay, when it stopped and hovered. Half an hour to 45 minutes later, when they next looked, the UFO was gone. Hunker, the guy who was investigating this and interviewing the couple, was able to interview the couple several days later. He also spoke with the wigwam waitress, who confirmed that Frank and Kathy had indeed been at the restaurant at the stated time. She could not, however, confirm the weird story they had told. Nonetheless, she recalled seeing a strange man sitting alone at the bar and wondering who he was and why he was there by himself at such a late hour. Hunker located 2 CB operators who said that they had heard Long Rifle Man's UFO report. One claimed to have seen the object himself. For their part, Frank and Kathy insisted they wanted no publicity. I mean, yeah, don't blame them. They refused Hunker's request for a second interview, though he heard later from a source that Frank and a friend had gone back to the sighting area and there observed hundreds of white lights moving about the roads and fields. Now, this sighting also tracks with another sighting in Galapagos, Ohio, 1966, bing, bing, which we've been reading about. A lot of strange Ohio sightings we read about recently on Monsters After Midnight, and in Dimensions and other books that we've read in the Saturday morning and Sunrise book club. But yeah, in this one, a farm woman reported witnessing a landing and speaking briefly with its occupants who spoke like a phonograph record playing at the wrong speed. Just like Frank's sighting, right? Frank and Kathy, their guy spoke like she said, like a record at the wrong speed. So again, it tracks with the weird questions, the weird voices, like asking what time it is, saying you're from Kansas. The last aspect of this sighting that lines up with a lot of things we've been reading, from abduction to dimensions to everything we read on Monsters After Midnight, is this sense of what one researcher, Ginny Randles, coined the Oz factor of this phenomena. When you're transported to another land where time runs differently. Frank and Kathy in the diner with the waitress not remembering the man or the confrontation where it seemed like they were literally yelling at each other. I don't know, you remember that? But remembering a strange man being there. They were like maybe isolated in a little time capsule. All the way to another one of my favorites, an Area 51 abduction, where the dude has a classic alien abduction experience, and the lady gets pulled into a van by military dudes, and it's just like injected with something and then admonished and told, don't tell anyone about this. And they both have a lost time of about an hour and a half or so. The day an extraterrestrial visited the Roswell UFO Museum. This story comes from E.J. Wilson, who was a Roswell UFO Museum tour guide from March 2000 to May 2010. So this is straight from E.J. This comes from his words. It's a letter he wrote into this book, Real Encounters, Different Dimensions, and Otherworldly Beings by Brad Steiger and Sherry Hansen Steiger. Definitely check it out. It's a good one if you're into weird encounters. So this EJ wrote in. These are his words on his sighting. Over 100,000 people visit the Roswell UFO Museum each year. And in the words of EJ, we get all kinds. We had every kind of human you can imagine. Some of them were different or strange, but they were all humans, as far as any of us could tell. That changed in September of 2009. My coworker Gail and myself were checking in guests at the front counter. I had a strange pair of gentlemen check in with a Dallas zip code. One looked like a normal Texas cowboy, complete with a cowboy hat, jeans, plaid shirt, and cowboy boots. He spoke with a Texas accent. The only thing unusual about him was that he was no taller than 5 feet 2 inches. His companion was every bit of 7 feet tall and 300 pounds. In appearance, he was humanoid, but not strictly human. His eyes were twice the size of yours or mine and set at the side of his head. Huh? Now, I want to be very clear about that. His eyes were huge, at least twice the size of a human's, and set on the side of his head, like a horse's. His eyes were perhaps a little back behind where our own temples would be. What the fuck? Or the front edges of our ears. If you're familiar with the 1960s show Bonanza, I think of these two as Haas and Little Joe. Of course, everyone should be aware that some people are born different. That's not what I'm referring to. When this being looked at me, I got a funny feeling in my stomach that the thought of off-worlder came into my head. I never had that sensation before or since, presumably because I have not encountered any other off-worlders, or if I have, none has transmitted that sensation to me. I speak a few languages, and I'm always interested in accents and regionalisms, so I was dying to hear this being talk. So, y'all from Dallas? But every time I asked Haas a question, Little Joe answered. It was infuriating. I wanted to say to Little Joe, would you please let Haas answer? The large being did not say a single word that entire time. By this time, my coworker Gail was through with whatever she was doing, and the strange pair from Dallas had completed check-in and gone into the exhibit area. Without planting a suggestion of any kind, I told her, get a look at the big fellow when he comes back around. But that, bro, that is planting a suggestion. When you're like, get a look at this guy, that you're suggesting to somebody that there's something weird about this dude. Just saying. But anywho, I didn't say anything about his being an alien, an ET hybrid, nothing. I wanted her to form her own opinion. I kept an eye on them. They never spoke to each other either, but I noticed that they would look at something together on an exhibit and then look back at each other, and then look at something and look back at each other again. It was as though they were telepathic in communication. Well, if you're telepathic, do you even need to look at the person? I'm not trying to poke holes in the story. I believe this guy. I'm just curious. Like, would you need to look at them? They came out of the exhibit hall and Gail was out in the lobby, so she got a good look at the big one, face to face. It was clear she made eye contact the same way I had. She ran over to me and said, "Oh my God, EJ, he's not from Earth." We watched as he went through the door to the gift shop and he filled the entire door frame. Did he buy anything? The tallest human I've ever met is a computer salesman in Atlanta, Georgia area. He was 6 feet 8 inches tall and pretty stout also. But he was a good bit shorter than the alien. Would you like to buy a computer? Oh, sorry. Bad joke, bad camera knock. I want to point out that every tall human I've ever known has been self-conscious about their height. Not necessarily shy, but they do have to be careful about overhead light fixtures, even going through doors and stuff, in case something is hanging down they could bump into. Very often, with the tall people I've known, they've developed a slumped posture in an effort to minimize their height. This is because a tall person has had to adapt to a shorter environment here on Earth. Yeah, I mean, I'm thoughts and prayers to the too tall and the too short, like that. I'm 5'11", so like just a normie. The world was just made for me, so you just walk through doors, no problem. I got that 5'11" privilege. That was not the case with this alien. He walked through the museum without a care, as though wherever he grew up, he did not have to adapt to a shorter world, as though everything was the appropriate size and height for him. Or he could just be someone with confidence, you know what I mean? Not everyone is, you could just be accepting of yourself and like, you know, you could carry yourself that way. And he never had the concern to concern himself with it. If you've been in the UFO Museum, there actually is a lot of overhead room. So after they got in the door, there were no hanging obstructions. I mean, maybe he sensed that too. Anywho, the above account was published in a few different things. A book called Roswell USA, Towns That Celebrate UFOs, Lake Monsters, Bigfoot, and Other Weirdness by John LeMay, Roswell historian. Pretty cool. Now, our boy EJ goes on to have another encounter. He's at a coffee shop, and someone recognizes him. They're like, "Oh, you're EJ." And EJ's like, "Oh my gosh, am I famous?" And it ends up being just someone who claims that they channel other beings, gray aliens. And they start talking to EJ, and EJ's like, "What was the dude that came into the UFO Museum?" And the channeler's like, "It was a reptoid guy." And then EJ's like, "What would the reptoid man have sounded like if he spoke?" And the entity's like, "His voice would have been very deep." So that's the encounter at the Roswell Museum. Haas and Little Joe. Strange folk or strange entity, or something in between. To wrap up tonight, we are going to be exploring encounters with the men in black. And I wish I was talking about Will Smith and Tommy Lee Jones, because that would be really fun. But we're talking about the spooky and scary, uncanny valley, interdimensional, otherworldly men in black that visit you when you get too close to the truth and kindly, not so kindly, ask you to stop. Interdimensional beings garbed in all dark clothing or dressed in black aren't new. Sightings go back, I mean, this book that we're reading right here, date them in 1905, but we know from reading Dimensions, similar encounters of oddly garbed men in black go back all the way to, ancient times. So we do have an encounter here, March 30th, 1905. A Welsh newspaper reported that men dressed in black had appeared in the bedroom of several people in a town over the course of several nights. But flash forward, 1953 is when men in black really enter popular culture and UFO folklore permanently, when Albert K. Bender of Bridgeport, Connecticut, abruptly closed down his popular International Flying Saucer Bureau, the IFSB, and refused to elaborate on a cryptic statement in the last issue, October 1953, of the IFSB magazine Space Review. The statement indicated that Bender now knew the answer to the UFO mystery, but could not publish it because of orders from a higher source. Now, I know this sounds like he's just being like, oh, I got to get out of the UFO game. I'm going to just tell everyone I know the answer. But this tracks with like all like the ancient like knowledge, esoteric mystery schools, I don't know, stuff of the occult and UFOs and beyond. The point is the mystery. The point is for you to figure it out yourself, not to be told. Because even if you were told, that doesn't mean you'll believe. You wouldn't necessarily believe or understand. So you have to like really, it's like a personal journey. So maybe, you know, Bender was onto something. In addition, he urged those engaged in saucer work to please be very cautious. Pressed by Gary Barker, who was the magazine's chief investigator, Bender would say only that 3 men in black suits had visited him in September and told him what UFOs are and threatened him with prison if he revealed what they had told him. The experience was so traumatic that Bender subsequently felt ill. He told Barker that the strangers were quote-unquote members of the United States government. And here's the actual sketch he made of one of these men in black that visited him. So that is the one of the 3 men in black that Bender encountered. You could see those lines radiating off them. Maybe they're stink lines, probably aura lines, or showing that they like glowed and were like otherworldly. But look at that, no real face, right? You'll see that. That's a common feature when you look up. There's a classic like fake picture on the internet of like a couple men in black, but they just look like mannequin faces. That's what's really creepy about them. They kind of live in that uncanny valley place. Now, Bender ends up getting maligned because he starts writing some really, really wild books about the men in black. I mean, if you're asking me, you're probably asking the wrong guy, but I'm going to say I believe Bender's other stories. Typically, with all these stories that I've been reading, reports we've been reading, in all the books we've read on the Sunrise Book Club and Monsters After Midnight, they all have reports of people who, once you have an encounter, more encounters happen. And even I've been fortunate enough for people to stop by here on the book club and Monsters After Midnight and shared their stories. They're typically not just one story. People have several encounters because you're in the mode of it. The veil's a little thinner for you. You're encountering these things. So if Bender really had an encounter with these 3 dudes who showed up and told him to shut down, then he probably had other encounters with the men in black. And the books that he wrote might be filled with truths and fictions, like all stories are. Bender's story ends in 1960 when he claims the entities that he was in contact with left back to their home planet. But while he was in contact with them, they took him to like the South Pole, Hollow Earth, Inner Earth, and he was introduced to ginormous aliens there. So take that for what you will. If you're asking me, 100%. Bender, I believe. Now, the men in black here weren't just running around hassling magazine folk and people who had seen UFOs. They also ran into one of our favorite heroes and granddaddies of the weird, John A. Keel. In both of his, he has many books. The only books I've read fully, Strange Creatures from Time and Space, and then what I've read excerpts of, Mothman Prophecies, both talk about his encounters with the men in black. When he was out there in West Virginia investigating the Mothman, connecting for the first time in the West, in Western research, Bigfoot sightings, UFO sightings, space aliens, ghosties, ghoulies, all together. He started being harassed by black Cadillacs, men in dark suits. He would follow the cars would vanish down dead-end roads. He started receiving threatening phone calls from Indrid Cold as well. So if you are to believe John A. Keel, then you're going to believe that the men in black were harassing him as well. If you're asking me, I'm saying, oh yeah, baby. He weren't lying to us. Now let's fast forward to May 1975, 2 weeks after a dramatic sighting from his Piper PA-24. A sighting confirmed on the radar screens at the Mexico City airport. A young pilot was pursued down the freeway by 4 black-suited Scandinavian, quote-unquote, looking men in a black limousine. After forcing him to the side of the road, they warned him not to discuss his sighting. The pilot was on his way to do a television interview. A month later, one of the strangers reappeared and threatened him again as he was on his way to a hotel to talk with J. Allen Hynek. Dr. Hynek? The prominent American astronomer and UFO investigator, granddaddy of Project Blue Book and believer, that was his last meeting with the MIB, whom he remembered as tall and strangely white. I never saw them blink, he added. So there we go. A modern tale in 1975 where this dude had an encounter and was going to talk to J. Allen Hynek about it. Dr. Hynek, mind you, who was working for the government. When was this? 75? I think he had left the government at that point, but he was the hand-picked scientist to study UFOs by old Uncle Sam, and he started out as a skeptic, but the more he looked into cases, the more he realized that it was all real, and he became a true believer and granddaddy of the weird. So in 75, this pilot was going to talk to him, and the men in black harassed him. There we go. Another encounter. Here come the men in black. And all that you remember is true. And also, for you non-believers, which I don't know why you'd even be watching if you don't believe in this stuff, it was a pilot who went through this, guys. They have to be like spot on everything. It's just, unless they're like a true little scamp of a prankster. I believe, that it's tough to like be sharp enough to fly a plane. You really got to go through a lot of training for that. So anywho, I lean more to trusting that. Maybe that's ignorant of me. I don't know, but that's my 2 cents. Now, by the late 80s, there were so many stories of this that some serious-minded researchers, some PhD folk, the academics, if you will, looked into it. The Journal of American Folklore put their guy Peter M. Roseskowitz on it to survey the MIB's role, Men in Black's role, in the flying saucers legends and related it to earlier demonic traditions, right? Just like Jacques Vallée's doing in Dimensions, connecting these modern day sightings with ancient sightings, the demonic sightings, angel sightings. It's all the same shit. So this guy's doing the same research, right? Connecting these modern legends with the demonic traditions of people in black appearing to people. This researcher also had his own encounter while doing his research with the MIB. Though giving himself the pseudonym Michael Elliott while doing research on UFOs in a library, he was approached by a dark-featured, dark-suited man who, speaking briefly in a slight accent about flying saucers, placed his hand on Rojaskowicz's shoulder and said, "Go well in your pursuits," and then vanished. Are aliens out there? Yes. Are they already here? Yes. Are they interdimensional? Yes. Are they possibly from another planet? Yes. Is that actually yes to all those yeses? I don't know. Maybe. But do I believe every encounter that was talked about tonight? Yeah. I think someone encountered something. I'm more with what Dr. Jacques Vallée talks about in his book Dimensions, how these things are probably interdimensional or some deep part of our psyche that is projected into the mass hallucination that we live in, that's here to teach us something. But I don't even that. Like, I don't know. Like, I just believe that there's something more to this physical world that we live in. Maybe that's the very least I can say. But thank you for joining me for Monsters After Midnight tonight. Aliens that walk among us. We went through several different stories and examples of humanoid-like and humans that appear to be from another world. Now, if you're thinking about channelers, I'm 100% on channelers as well. There's a few I like to listen to, but I definitely think that entities of higher consciousness are out there trying to communicate with us to help us escape the bounds of our current level of consciousness. But again, hey, what am I even talking about? That's Monsters After Midnight. Thanks for joining me. If you want to listen to me read a bit, I'll be here for another Saturday morning book club next Saturday. So join me then, bright and early. We'll be reading chapter 7 of Dimensions. And then Saturday night, we'll be back for Monsters After Midnight. But thanks for joining. That's all I got for y'all. Have a beautiful rest of your night, and I'll catch you later. Ta-ta.